Hello and welcome back to our bookshop in Tring. I'm Ben Moorhouse. So we've got another author interview and we're talking to Kadiatu Kanneh-Mason. She is the mother of the famous Kanneh-Mason family, and she's written a book called The House of Music. It's a memoir of bringing up the most talented family of musicians in the world. They shot to fame in 2016 when Sheku Kanneh-Mason won BBC Young Musician of the Year. And his cello playing is extraordinary, as is all the musicianship amongst the family. It was an absolute honour to talk to Kadiatu. I do enjoy the interview. Can I just congratulate you on firstly on this? It was sent to me probably 2 months ago, and I instantly replied. I said, "Look, I want an interview. I don't care, you know." Oh. And mainly because there's one or two little links. And I will tell you, you start your book with the final, the big final, yeah. Sheku's final. And I remember a friend of mine, Julie, who plays in the BBC Symphony Orchestra. She came home either after the semi-final, I think it's probably after the semi-final, and just said, "There's this extraordinary cellist." No, it was probably the final, wasn't it? It must have been the final.
Yeah, but yeah, for the orchestra.
There's this extraordinary cellist, and she said, and she doesn't talk about her work generally, you know, and she, it's an unusual event for her to come back, you know, as one of the instrumentalists from the orchestra, and I can't imagine how you must have experienced that event, but the most incredible thing.
It was something that, as a family, was probably the standout event of our lives together. It was incredible, and a culmination of so many things, but very emotional.
Fantastic. No, I can understand. So you've written a book, The House of Music, which I've inhaled, and I enjoyed it so much. Honestly, the emotions of it are so real, and I think we'll get to that. I found tears running down my face, either of sadness or joy or whatever emotion you're obviously writing it in. But my first genuine question is, where did you find the time to write this?
That's a very good question. And it's something that, in fact, the children wanted me to write about it, because every time that I had a concert with them, people would come up to me and say, "Well, why don't you write a book? Is there going to be a book?" And I would just laugh and say, "There's no time." And then the children started saying, "Well, why don't you?" And I was saying, "Well, it's ridiculous. It's impossible." And then I found that there was a little bit of time. Once the youngest went to school, there was time between 9 and 3 when I wasn't doing the washing, and I would make myself just have an hour and just go upstairs and just do it. But it was difficult.
Imagine. And have you been a diary keeper through your life? Is there any notes you made through the years?
I was a diary keeper until I had my first child, and then there was no time. And I really thought I would carry on writing a diary, but when you've got children, it's just impossible. You get to bed, you think you're going to read a book or write something, and that's it. You're exhausted.
I was exhausted just reading it, frankly. Just reading what you had to go through, the kind of the shenanigans of I mean, 7 kids. Wow. I mean, that's just an extraordinary amount of time. And at the time when there's only a 13-year difference between top and bottom. Yeah. I remember it's the same as my family, 13 years. And so, and all being schooled, you know, from home or obviously going to school. So most extraordinary endeavour. And so I was wondering, I mean, obviously doing this interview now, is this a quiet moment? Are they all at school? What's happening at that? What's happening?
Well, two are at school, and I've got one about to go to the Royal College on Saturday for the first time. I've got Easter and Brian were at home because he had to record his final recital at home because, of course, with COVID, everything's very different. And so they've only just stopped playing. I said, "Can you stop playing so I can do this interview?" So they're having their lunch now.
Oh, no, I'd love that. I'd love to be able to hear the music in the background. That'd be fine. Shout to them to start again. No, that would be lovely. But, right. So the other thing I love about the book is the fact that you, it's whilst there's a chronology to it, you do jump around. And I think that's quite nice. You sort of, you pull elements of and you almost go through the same story on 2 or 3 different occasions from 3 different angles, which is wonderful, and some remarkable stories. I think probably what we should do is start with Sierra Leone. I think your origins, your first 4 years of your life. I mean, that's what was life like in Sierra Leone? I kind of was reading it and thinking of a far more basic style of living compared to the images I've since looked when I was researching and looking at Sierra Leone and looking at your Magbarata, isn't it, where you were born?
Magburaka, yes.
Magburaka, yeah. So what was life like in Sierra Leone?
Well, of course, there are my memories of it, which were that everything was very happy. We had a huge family there. So it was just cousins and aunties and uncles and lots of social time. And yes, I suppose it was a much simpler life. And it was just a very happy life. Of course, all the troubles that came later with the war and everything was later. So that was a particularly happy time, I think. And there was a coup, of course, when I was little, but I remember none of that. So.
Okay, no, okay, and you've got very distinct memories of your father. Obviously, sadly, he died when you were only 4. But you're, and I can entirely understand those sort of first 4-year memories where you just envisage your father and him being there, and how and what an inspirational character he seemed to have been to you in terms of your life moving forward.
Yes, he was a huge personality, always laughing. He was one of those people who was always at the centre of a party, at the centre of every gathering. So, of course, when he went, life changed a lot. But then, of course, when we came to Britain, my grandfather kind of took that role because he also had a great big personality as well.
Yeah, your grandfather's he was a Baptist
minister.
Minister, yeah. He sounds like a real character, absolutely.
Yes, absolutely.
And I think the Megan, your mother, is obviously still around, still a very big part of your life.
Yes, still living in Wales and still very much present. Yes.
Brilliant. So those days, and you returned to England in 1970. That's a really different England to the England we have now, or.
It's interesting because, of course, for me, it wasn't a return to England. It was the first time I'd ever been here. Sorry. So it was a complete shock. And what's worrying me now, and why when I wrote that, it all seemed so much more relevant again, was that lots of things seem to be returning to how it was then. And I always felt that hopefully we were moving away. But so many reminders now of going back to a lot of those scenarios. So not massively different.
Yeah,
in some ways.
That's a really tricky subject, isn't it? Because it comes down to personal experience and stuff. And me being who I am, I experience none of that. I don't have the. Having said that, my son, who's he's also in music, but he's a grime producer. He does he's in a world which is inherently very black, and so he's got a lot of black friends who he goes out with, and on occasions they ask him to go, if they go into the pub or something, they ask him to go in first, to allay the people's fears and to ensure that it's not a problematic kind of experience, and that's been for my son, who grew up in such a very a remarkably white middle class environment like Tring is, that was a real shock, so that's been the basis to many conversations that we've had at home, actually. But,
and it's interesting, that idea of the 1970s, because a lot of people I talk to remember it as this kind of idyllic age, and I always look at them and think, really? So there are 2 different experiences. It's true.
You still present the lovely kind of experience of walking down to the sweet shop with your 4p and getting I remember those days. We're about the same age, frankly. So I remember going to the pot and all those pots on the side all lined up, and I can't remember. I think I really loved refreshers. That was my thing, refreshers.
Yes, I love sherbet fountains.
And the sherbet fountains, and the walnut whips, which I couldn't bear the walnut, but I loved everything else.
Exactly.
But no, it was a good. It was my memory. I was growing up in Yorkshire in the countryside, you know, so it was a very different environment to. Having said that, I then lived in London in Hither Green, which is obviously where
Oh yes.
Stuart's. Is it Stuart's family were from?
They're from Catford, Lewisham, that area.
Catford. Yeah. So George Lane comes down, and you've got Catford on one side and Lewisham on the other. So no, that's
right.
we lived there for a few years in London, but. And you've managed over those years to return to Sierra Leone a few times, but I can understand since Ebola and various other things, it's been impossible for you all to go back. Is that right?
Well, we probably could go, but before COVID, of course, we were planning to go back probably next year. So now, of course, we don't know what's going to happen. But I think it is somewhere that you can visit, and it's a lovely place to go. My mother and brother and sister all went back a few years back, and I had a brilliant time. Yeah. So now it's a question of getting enough time to go.
Yeah, well, I suspect it's a diary issue with all of the kids. You know, they're all
exactly.
Some fairly significant things. So how I'm jumping around with the interview actually, but as things spring to mind. But how do you manage the diary when you've now got sort of solo performers and group performers and the whole band as a whole, as I suppose, haven't you? So yeah.
No, it's very difficult because there's so many different elements. As you say, there's the band as a whole, and then there's all these solo performers, and then of course they get together and they play as a piano trio, the older three, and sometimes the younger three play as a piano trio. Shaku and I used to play as a duo, so it's a nightmare. So we do have an assistant who helps with all of that because it is very difficult.
A diary, yeah.
So I don't do that all on my own.
Well, given how prompt you were in arriving for this meeting, I think I suspect you could do it without a problem at all. So. I think the one thing that kept popping up throughout the book is the lack of role models. I think, you know, in terms of your life when you were growing up, and in Stuart's case, I suspect as well, there was nobody for you to act as a role model. And I suspect same with your kids. You know, the idea of getting into classical music that's inherently white thing in this country. You know, they've broken so many boundaries, and that's the most incredible thing. Have you always found that role model thing quite frustrating?
Yes, but it just made us all the more determined, and I never wanted them to feel that was the case. So we never pointed it out. We just said, that's fine, you just go and do it. If you want to do it, you do it. And I think we dealt with it by having role models, not in classical music, but in other areas, people who had achieved amazing things or were interesting. And so that's how we did it. It doesn't have to be in the field you want to go in. It can just be inspiring people.
Yeah, and thus the Bob Marley posters in Sheku's room, or the Muhammad Ali. Is that Muhammad Ali? I can't remember the.
Yes.
You very bravely kind of referenced the sort of school gate kind of stuff when you're being accused of being a pushy or a tiger mum or whatever the phrase is. I don't know what these days. And I it's an interesting one because I at no point did I think of you as pushy at all. Reading this, it wasn't something. I mean, maybe I don't know. But then I read a couple of passages to a couple of friends I have, and individually the female said, "Oh, that's a pushy mum."
Oh, really?
It's. Do you find this as a gender thing where the females? I don't know. Is that the case with the female? Whereas the men were very impressed.
No, I haven't found that. I found it's a cultural thing. I think people in Caribbean, African cultures and old-fashioned Welsh cultures as well are probably a lot more straightforward and a lot more, their boundaries are much firmer. So maybe that's it. And also I think in Black cultures in this country, everyone's very aware that you have to work really hard to achieve anything. So there is that sense. Is it a gender thing? I think I am very careful not to sound like a judgmental mother as well, because I think being a parent, being a mother is incredibly difficult. There are lots of challenges. It's not easy. So I don't want it to seem like I've got all the answers and I know how to do it, because I don't think anyone does. And there's no such thing as a super mum either.
No.
So.
I think the reality is we're all making this up as we're going along.
Exactly. Exactly.
I think, to be brutally honest, this whole kind of Zoom kind of author interviews, this is indicative of, I started a YouTube channel at the start of this whole lockdown just because I needed something to do,
Yes.
whilst running a bookshop and organising a festival. So, yeah, I mean, we are just all making it up as we're going along. I think the one constraint, there must have been so many constraints, honestly, but financial, how on earth you managed to, you were the committed stay-at-home mum, Stuart doing whatever he could, earning as much money as he could, but money can only go so far, and you've got 7 kids all needing instruments, needing school stuff, needing clothing, needing I can't imagine how you managed that.
It was on a wing and a prayer. It was not easy. And there were some years when we really weren't sure if we were going to go under or, but luckily Stuart's a risk taker and he's very, very optimistic. And there were times when we'd go to bed and think, is the house going to stay up or what's going to happen? But we just got through it. And I look back now and think it was very brave, but also very risky because it's incredibly expensive. That's true.
Yeah, absolutely. And the house you're in, which obviously the house of music, is that the same house that you've lived in all this time in Nottingham?
Yes, it's the same house. So we've been here for 19 years.
Wow.
So yes, almost the last 3 children were born here, but we came when the oldest was 5 when we moved in. Yes. So it's definitely the house that everything happened. Yeah.
No, absolutely. And I love. Towards the end of the book, you kind of give a guided, almost like a farewell walk around the house as to the things that have happened in each room, and that's so emotional. Honestly, it's just a lovely bit. Anyway, there's a couple of favourite stories that I really love, and notwithstanding Sheku in the final and the kind of inside story on that, which formed the first chapter, I suppose, the first part, and also a chunk of later. I adored the St Bartholomew's Orchestra story. Give us a lowdown on how that came to fruition and what that was to people who haven't read the book yet.
I think so many things. People always say it's amazing what you've done as parents, but actually so much has come back from the children because that was entirely Ista's idea. She'd heard piano concertos, saw a score of a concerto, thought, well, why don't I write one? And we just thought, okay. And then my mum brought her the Sibelius app for writing music. And next thing we knew she'd written a piano concerto, which for us was incredible. And she just loved it, and it all came from her. So I think children are incredibly surprising, and if you give them the tools, they are incredibly creative.
That's right.
So. And then the rest was.
But then Stuart stepped in, didn't he? Yeah. His confidence. I mean, that's absolutely brilliant. I'm the same. I'm exactly like that. Way too confident for my own good. I do get myself into trouble. But he then decided to send that off to orchestras. I have to say, that's an amazing thought.
Yes, and I thought, are you crazy? But nothing will stop. I mean, Stuart just thinks he can do anything, and anyone can do anything, and that, which is an incredibly impressive thing, because I don't think I'm like that. And yes, an orchestra said yes, and she actually played the concerto to a big audience. It was a most amazing moment, and I think what it showed her is she really could do anything.
Yeah, absolutely. Wonderful. A lesson in life. And I suppose, meanwhile, you've got Brima and Sheku watching this from a kind of, they're all clocking all this, taking all this on, and when you say no role models, Ista has been that role model in many ways, hasn't she? She's been,
absolutely, absolutely. And the BBC Young Musician final didn't come from nowhere. He had definitely seen Ista. He'd seen his brother and sister do amazing things, and so he wanted to do the same. So exactly, it would have been interesting to see if he had been the first child, what would have happened. Because he definitely looked up to Ista and Brima.
Well, he's a product of being, he's the third of you know, he's the working. Well, I mean, Brimer is obviously the first male, but no, Sheku wouldn't have been who Sheku is if he'd been first, second,
Absolutely.
maybe even fourth or fifth. I don't know, but having said
Absolutely.
that,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sixth in line, in a sixth, and when you come last, you normally find parents have been battered into submission and are far more lax and easygoing on you compared to. Is that the case for Mariatu?
Well, Mariatu is in a lot of ways brought up by her brothers and sisters. They are much stricter with her than I am, actually, and they expect a lot of her. So she scrabbles to keep up. But that's definitely true. We were quite strict and rigid with Aista and Brimer and Sheku in a way in which we're probably not so much for the younger ones. But as I say, they bring up each other.
Yeah. So bedtime routines gradually. Well, I went to bed a lot later.
Yes, exactly.
I can remember.
That's very true.
And the story about the car. I mean, the ongoing battles with you keeping a car going. I trust, as a initially, I trust that's all resolved now. I mean, you've got a decent car now, surely, for the family bus.
Well, we've still got an old 9-seater car, but it does run. It hasn't rusted away yet.
Yeah, and
yes.
the pair of you falling asleep at the wheel and taking it in turns and swapping over. I mean, that's just extraordinary. And then obviously, sadly, the crash, which, I mean, that's just incredible.
This was a wake-up call.
Yeah, describe that day, that evening, that night.
I think we thought that we could just pack as much as we wanted into the family schedule, and we were going to do everything. We drove all the way to Sussex for this music festival, which they were in all weekend, drove back late at night. Stuart had work in the morning, and it was just all too much, and we were absolutely exhausted. So I think when Stuart finally fell asleep at the wheel and crashed, we had to then really reassess our lives and think, okay, we're not superhumans. And I think parents have to make sure they're doing what's within their means to do.
Yeah,
really.
Well, exactly. How long ago was that? I didn't get the timeline on my.
Mariatu was a baby, so it was about 11 years ago.
Oh, so some time. Okay, I'm with you.
Yeah, yeah.
A time is ticking. Honestly, I knew this because it's 30 minutes we've got, so we've got 5 minutes left. So I need to. I've rattled through a last couple of bits. I didn't know about Britain's Got Talent. I don't watch it, so I wasn't aware. So it came as an entire revelation to me as I was turning the pages, and suddenly you're talking about. And I can't. Honestly, my heart sank when I read these passages. I mean, I know what you're going to say. You're going to say the importance of being able to present yourself out there to the maximum audience, because it's about role models in the end, isn't it?
Yeah,
So when that inquiry came, what were your feelings?
So first of all, we turned it down several times, and then they talked to us, and we talked to each other and thought, well, maybe it is really important that we do show that classical music, number one, is not a horrible, scary thing which only certain people can play, and just bring it out to everyone to inspire somebody. So that was the reason we did it. And I think we would probably stand by that. It was an important thing that we did. Because I think we want it to be something that everyone can do.
Yeah.
So that was the reason behind that. Yeah.
I kind of love the for the semi-final. They insisted you play something else. They weren't happy with the piece that the kids had produced of it.
Yeah. So in the end, we wouldn't compromise, because we thought the whole point was to go out and show how wonderful classical music is, not to go out and then become something different. So in the end, we kind of bowed out quite gracefully and just stuck to our guns. And I think that's the important thing. I think that primetime television is afraid of things like classical music, and they're afraid of making these things available to everyone. And that makes it even more esoteric, even more exclusive. And I think that's a shame. Yes,
no, absolutely. And long may we have classical music on the telly, frankly. And I hope, I mean, the BBC, the proms are on now. Are any of yours doing the proms?
Yes. Aista and Sheku will be on Friday night.
Oh, wow. Okay, I need to get this out quickly. So, but So, I mean, there's two passing thoughts actually. I've written at the bottom, healthy neglect. It's a comment your mum made to you, and it just felt like it kind of had an important phrasing to it, because I felt that allowing the kids to grow in their own kind of way, and that's a very useful lesson to have. And I suppose, do you recall that the message she gave you?
Yes, and I think it was really important, because what she was saying is children are incredibly creative. They need to play, they need to express themselves, and they can't do it top down. They have to do it themselves. And that's where the concerto came from, because Ista just went away and wrote it. We didn't have any input into that, and that was entirely her. And I think it's good to let your children develop as well. You can't control everything, and you shouldn't.
No, exactly. Well, thank you for your time. House of Music. I've written at the bottom, House of Memories. That's the name of one of your chapters, which obviously you did the tour, which I loved it. Honestly, it was such a lovely read, and congratulations on not just the book. I mean, frankly, for being you, and for what you've managed to create in your family. You are an absolute. Well, I don't know. You're fantastic. So
thank you very much. Thank you.
And if you ever come near Tring, pop on in. And got a lovely theatre in Tring. When it's very small though.
When it opens, let's hope that's soon.
I know. I run a book festival and a comedy festival here in the town, and I'm still thinking the book festival could happen in November, but
hope so.
I'm sort of planning a mix of real and virtual, and seeing if that will come together.
Yes. Well, good luck, because we want all these live places open again.
Exactly. But thank you so much, and yes, and keep up the good work.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Massive thanks to Kadiatu for that wonderful interview. House of Music is available in our bookshop. Give us a call on 01442 827 653. All the other purchase blurb is available in the text below this video. Thank you for joining us. Do subscribe to our YouTube channel, and there'll be many more interviews to come.